From the beautiful Finger Lakes region of upstate New York, this is the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. We take questions from anyone in the dental profession and discuss what it takes to win not only in dentistry, but in life. Business, leadership, relationships, parenting, health and wellness, money management, nothing is off limits on the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. I'm Jason Tenori, your host, and have over 20 years of experience to pull from. Learn from my mistakes and let me help you collapse time so you can become the best version of yourself. Yo, welcome back. Dr. Jason here at Dental Lighthouse Podcast, and I am super excited for you guys to hear my guest today. He is a savant when it comes to all things marketing, and he doesn't do it based on intuition or gut feel. It's all data driven. He's someone that I have been working with intimately, with his firm intimately for it's gotta be 5+ years now.
Yeah.
And he and I were talking before we hit record, and he feels that there's definitely some trends that a lot of practice owners need to be aware of. Not trying to do any fear mongering, but just want everyone to be as prepared as possible and control what you can control. So super excited to have Ryan Gross from CMO Share on the podcast today. How you doing, brother?
Good. Thanks, Jason. I'm glad to be back on a podcast with you. So excited to see your journey. You know, you said 5 years. That's about right that we've been working together and seeing your journey as the practice and your company growing and then now what you're doing here. So it's been a pleasure to be on this side of watching what you've been able to achieve.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And you've obviously been on my imaginary board of directors and someone that we've always leaned on for great strategy and great advice. So I really appreciate that, Ryan. So, Ryan and I were just talking. Seems like over the last 12 months, there's just been explosive growth in dentistry, finally getting off of the COVID hangover, and a lot of deals are going down and what have you. But there is some rumblings, some musings that is the economy going to slow down? Are we about to hit that cycle where we start to, I don't want to mention the R word recession, but are we going to start to see a slowdown? And it is what it is, right? But I guess what I would love to get out of this conversation, Ryan, is kind of the stoic mindset that I always have is control the controllables, right? What can we be doing at the highest level to try to ensure our success and not worry about the things that are totally out of our control? So could you start at a high level, just kind of what you're seeing when you take an initial look at the data, and then we can start to dive in and give our audience maybe some tactical granular strategies to take advantage of anything that they can possibly control?
Yeah. So if you look at the past 12 months, for example, it's been an interesting turn. We've seen this dating back even 18 months in the smaller numbers of the amount of people who are searching for and looking for a dentist based upon some type of financial reason. And this is somewhat unique because if you look back from the data that we've had for 6-7 years now, most people look for a dentist for reasons are they take my insurance. It's obvious that's a high one, but how close they are to where I live or to where I work, and then they typically make a trigger point of deciding which dentist to go to based upon the actual doctor's page in the dentist. So when they go to a website, they'll go through and they'll look at, okay, this is Dr. Smith over here. I connect with Dr. Smith, so I'm going to go see this dentist. I believe that they have the values, the good experience. They're able to take care of me. And so that was typically the trigger point for most people to choose a dentist. Well, what we've seen is this slowly turn into more of people searching for a dentist based upon some type of financial reason. So, how much does it cost for X? What does my insurance cover? Is there a savings plan involved, or is there some type of financing involved? And so we've seen this kind of get from a smaller amount of searches to a much larger now, where we're seeing in some markets over 30% of the searches coming into a website are based upon this type of search. And so what that tells us is that there's a segment of the audience or the patient base out there who is obviously looking to choose the dentist, not based as much upon, where they're located, but can I afford to go see them? And this is somewhat, typical, or not typical, somewhat what happened in the 2008, 2009 housing crash and that recession was dentistry became the people when they were searching became a little bit more focused on how do I pay for this or can I pay for this? So we're seeing that from this high level of people making the choice for this on those reasons. And what that's causing then is just a little disruption in the operations from what we see because this we listen to hundreds of new patient calls and in the past 80% of new patients typically would convert once they get on the phone with an office. The ones that didn't would convert for, usually availability. They wouldn't convert like, oh, I'm 3 weeks out. Okay, I'll call someone else. But what's interesting is when we look at the data now, we're seeing anywhere from 10 to 30% of people not choosing to go to a dentist because of insurances. We've never seen this. So it could be a PPO practice and they're calling in saying, do you take my insurance? And the practice is like, yes, we do. And then they follow up with questions like, okay, tell me how it works, what it covers, what are the costs going to be? And the office isn't able to answer those. And there's like, okay, thanks. Maybe I'll give you a call back and schedule. So it's changing dramatically.
Yeah, wow, there's so much to unpack there, Ryan. So you're saying, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding you correctly. As recently as say 2 years ago, one of the driving things that would get a particular patient to call a dental office was they'd go to the website, they'd click on the Meet Our Team or Meet the Doctors
Mm-hmm.
page, and then they'd see, okay, he's part of this organization, or he does this in his community, or he's
Mm-hmm.
been practicing for so long, and that would be the primary driver of I feel like I could be a good fit in this practice. So they would call and at least that would spur the initial call, right? But you're
Correct.
saying now, either through Google searches or through website searches, which is again, I have a follow-up question to that. You're saying that you on your end, you're seeing data that it's not so much about the relationship anymore, is about, how can I maximize my insurance, or how can I have the lowest level of out of pocket, or just it's more of a financial motivator than it was from a relationship perspective.
100% correct. Yeah. And when I talk about this group, this shift, I would say, you still have, when you look at a patient, like the total patient out there searching for a dentist, exclude Medicaid here for a moment. And you look at that group of patients who are PPO, or have insurance, when you dissect that group down, I'm talking about maybe 20 to 30% of the entire patient base group out there looking for a dentist who are experiencing these type of or who are doing these type of searches. So it's not, a majority, but if you take and you're averaging 100 new patients a month, and now 20 to 30% of those are now looking at the financial implications of going to the dentist, and you're not able to convert those as well, that makes a big difference in your growth.
No question. So let's role play is not the right word, but let's take our listeners and audience through a typical scenario of what you're hearing. Because, like you alluded to, I know you and CMO Share listen to just hundreds and hundreds of these recorded phone calls. So I'm Mrs. Jones. I get onto the website. You find through data analytics that I'm going to the insurance participation website. I see my plan. So I'm like, okay, this is a practice that I'm possibly going to consider. I call, and after the pleasantries of, thank you for calling, blah, 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 Mrs. Jones is saying, I see on your website that you are a participating provider with Blue Cross Blue Shield. Is in fact that the case, right? And you're saying, based on your research of listening to phone calls, how the other person, how our team member on the other end is handling that call, that question really will dictate if the patient is converted or not. Is that safe to say?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So what are some, let's, no one ever likes to hear the good things. Let's talk about some of the, I don't want to call them negatives, but some of the maybe, let me rewind the tape here a little bit. When you could first start listening to phone calls, and my team that listens to this podcast is probably rolling their eyes, but it must be 10 years ago now where we first started having access to listening to recorded phone calls. And I would listen to a bunch because I never had that opportunity to audit that system because I was always in the back prepping teeth, right? So once I started listening to these calls, some of them, my team hears me use this term all the time, were cringeworthy. Some of them were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she just said that to a patient, right? 'Cause you don't know
Yeah.
what you don't know. And so when you're listening to these calls and these patients are asking fairly black and white objective questions, what are you hearing that are some of these responses that are, let's call them less qualified?
Yeah, so it's very simple actually. So typically the person who cannot convert that new patient is saying this, like, we'll say, do you take Blue Cross Blue Shield? And the practice says yes. And they're like, okay, can you tell me, I've never been here. How does that work? What if I come and get a cleaning, what is that going to cost me? And so if they're not able to just quickly, or it's even further than that. A lot of them we hear are more like emergency based. They're like, okay, I have a toothache, and if I come in, I'm being very general here. I have a toothache, but I have some tooth pain, and I come in. What is that going to cost me? And if the practice says, well, I don't know, because you have to come in right there, boom, that's an issue. So because they're not answering that question, and now that patient's like, well, it's a big red flag. I don't know, and they say, well, it just depends, and sometimes they'll give a not even give a range, but they're like, it just really depends on all of your insurance situation. And if they don't follow up and say something to the effect of, that's a great question. We're going to have you come in, we meet the doctor, go through and see what's wrong, and then we're going to provide you with what the cost would be. But the great thing is we have multiple ways to help with you, help cover anything the insurance isn't going to cover. That almost 100% that patient's coming in.
Okay,
But when you
okay,
just in the conversation with I don't know, or you'll have to,
right.
we can't answer that over the call.
So I love this, right? Because this is real, and this will be a great training opportunity for my own team. So if the person on the other end, they either truly don't know because they're incompetent, or they truly don't know because the insurance game is vast and there's different rules and stuff
Yeah.
like that. And I am certainly I'm tremendously underqualified to even comment on this, but just listening to some of the stuff that comes out of my insurance department, again, you said Blue Cross Blue Shield. Well, there's 10 Blue Cross Blue Shields, right? And the
Mhm.
patient doesn't even really realize which one they have, right? So we can deal with the incompetencies of they they're just not trained well, right? Like, oh, well, I don't know if we take your insurance, but how are you coaching up the situations where we do have a well-trained team, but it is a situation where there's multiple plans and it depends on your employer. And are you saying that you're still trying to kind of lure them in by that empathetic tone, or asking more questions, or is there another strategy that you're encouraging your offices to do?
Yeah, so this is a little bit new to us because I wouldn't say we're experts on this side of it. So what we're trying to do is look at what's that point where the patient says no and they leave, and what do they say yes? Okay, let's schedule the appointment. And so we're looking at that piece there. And so what we do know is if the person, the staff member, the team member is saying, okay, giving as much information as possible, but really telling them, if you come in, we're going to evaluate what's going on, and we're going to give you financial options to help take care of whatever it is that you need. That's the trigger. If I say that,
Okay.
if they just say, we're gonna help take care of this with you, and there's multiple ways of saying that. But if they just stop and say, I can't answer that question until you come in, that one, you have a much higher percent of someone saying, okay, thanks, but no thanks.
That's good to know. Okay. So you're saying it's not just the team member saying, yes, we participate but you're saying like going, peeling back the onion one more level and saying,
Hmm.
and we will determine exactly what your out of pocket's going to be. And we have a number of ways that you can make those payments or financial arrangements or something along those lines. Um, I'm going to put, I'm going to put myself kind of in the hot seat, right? So I have friends in the community. I coach a lot of sports. So these families will text me because they have my phone and they'll say, "Hey, do you take GHI?" Right? That you just get these questions. Do you take Guardian? Do you take MetLife? And I'm not qualified to answer that question. So what I do is I say, "Why don't you send me your insurance card? I'll forward it to my insurance lead, and she can tell you specifically, what your plan covers, blah blah blah." Is that a strategy that you think is too is it unnecessary, or do you find like if you're going to try to take it to that level of customer service just to give the patient, super clear and accurate information that they end up losing that prospective patient?
I think it depends on the office and the area that you're in, really. So if you were to, I think that's the best way to answer this. If I'm, say, in Chicago versus where you are, I know there's a lot of competition around the practices that you have. But in Chicago, there's a lot of practices, or in New
Right,
York City, or Boston. And so I think it really comes down to an area. And if the guidance that I would give here is, you know, you might have to get more into the weeds if you are surrounded by more competition and more availability, because that's another piece. What I'm going to kind of segue into is the insurance and the cost is one question, but then the next right up follow that is, when can I get in?
right,
And so someone will, if we do a scenario, say like out by you, there we know in some of your locations that the competition just doesn't have as much availability as well. And we know that there isn't as much competition in certain areas. So if I'm a patient coming in and maybe I can't get all the answers answered the way I want, but I can still get in the next few days, I might be able to overcome the questions on the finances because of the availability. Or if there's no one else to be seen and they're trying to, they're going to come in. But if I'm in, say, like New York, for example, or around New York City, that's a completely different ballgame. And that's, I'll tell you, that's where we're seeing this the most, or is in the highly populated areas, because if they'll just go down the checklist, who's next, who's next, and especially if you're walking, like if you're in, across the bay in Jersey City, I could walk to 9 different dental offices if I lived down there,
yeah.
and so they'll just
So
go down that list.
so this is opening up another can of worms that I hope you have a few minutes that we can unpack.
Yeah.
Actually, I have so many questions for you, Ryan. Selfishly, I'm just utilizing your time for my own growth and not anyone else that's listening. But all right, two things, kind of different questions. I'm going to ask them one at a time. First one, when we started our relationship, like I said, a little over 5 years ago, one of the first pieces of advice you gave me, which I was so opposed to, but I ultimately succumbed, and it was the right decision, was fees on the website, right?
Mhm.
So is that still a strategy that you're encouraging dental practice owners to do more of this, fee transparency to the shopper on the website? And if that is a strategy that you're still strongly encouraging, why in fact is that?
Yeah, so that is definitely something we're still encouraging, and even more at this point. And so the reason, well, I guess let me back up. So we've taken that to the next step as well. So we have a fees page, but some of the new platforms that we're building out are really based around AI. And I'll kind of go into that here in the second part of this question is, but we're going to the point of when you go to like a service of what is like a veneer or a crown, or let's say a crown. Crown's a great example. A crown. What we have right off the bat there is, how much, or does this hurt? How long will it take, and how much does it cost? Because those are the questions people are going to ask right off the bat. So we know to even a higher extent to put the cost range right on the page that has to do with that service. And why this is important is because Google always preferred it because it's somewhat of a transparency and it answers a question. So if you're asking if you're Googling, how much does a crown cost? If it's not on your website, you're never going to show up for that. And so you have to give some type of information. But with AI out there and what it's doing is it's even going to a next step further is that's powering my ChatGPT, my Gemini, my Claude response. And so we're even having some practices now do video on cost of things because video is very important for AI. And I know we could have a whole podcast on AI, so I don't want to get too far into that. But yes, it's even more important. Then from a patient standpoint, it does answer that question. And so this is why, and it's, these are big ranges that you put on your website for
Yeah,
this.
yeah,
And so what happens is if I'm a patient who's calling in and I've gone to the website and the lowest cost is already above my cost threshold, and I've seen that you offer financing or whatever it is, I might not even call you. And I think, in my opinion, is that is essentially that's one less call that you may not convert in the first place. And so
Right.
I think that helps. But for everyone else, they're going to look at this and say, okay, this is a big range here. I'm going to at least see if I can get some information on it. And they're going to call because at least they know.
Yeah, 100%. So you're what you just said there, just again shows, and I don't want to speak for all dentists, but here I am, I'm going to, just shows how our minds are completely off when it comes to trying to think like a consumer. So as you were unpacking, these are the three questions that patients ask, and you said, is it going to hurt? How much is it going to cost? And how long it's going to take? As you were saying that, these are the three questions patients ask. In my mind, I'm immediately like, what material is the crown made of? Like that. Like they could care less, right?
Yeah.
But that, and you know that based on your data, but that's like the number one question I would ask as a patient. So just like it just
Yeah.
goes to show you that you're a dentist, stay in your lane, and make sure you're working with someone that actually knows about marketing. So I so appreciate you answering that first question, and I'm glad that we're still adopting your strategy and it's still your recommended strategy. On the flip side of that, and you and I have had a lot of conversations about this next question, and I've heard you lecture about it, is patients, at least again, this, I don't want to be outdated here, so please correct me if I'm wrong. You, for the longest time, maybe still up until today, were a believer in making sure that practices have online availability that's
Mhm.
present to the internet consumer, because your philosophy, and this could be backed up by data, is that they're looking online first to see availability, not necessarily scheduling online, but seeing if there's availability and then calling, right? Is that so? The first part of my
Correct.
question is still in fact your strategy?
Yes, it
Okay.
totally is.
Okay. So the second question is, and this is where I think there's a nuance here. Um, our schedules are full all day long. But if you call Ryan and you say I have a toothache, we will find a place to put you, right? We'll move Mrs. Jones over here and we'll shorten this
Yeah.
appointment. We'll figure out a way. So to follow up on part A of the question, is your strategy to create capacity online through like a ghost column or just something that shows that there's actually openings to get them to call so your rock star front desk coordinator can figure out a way to squeeze in this new patient emergency?
Yeah, that is a very good question. And I'm going to kind of give you 2 points to first of all, yes, we tell if you're able to create some availability every morning, open up what you can from cancellations or whatever. If you can do a ghost column, do that. Those are some methods, yes, because the more availability, then the more opportunity they will call. So we know that if you have if you have availability, that the number of calls increases dramatically. If you don't, it decreases. We can see that. We can see a chart with that all day long, that online availability changes the number of calls that you get. But I'm going to say something that I think is even more important than that is, on average, from a practice who has online scheduling, who doesn't, we now have enough data to show this, that you'll get 38% more traffic to your site if you have online scheduling. So you're increasing the amount of traffic to your site. And even if you don't have availability, the amount of traffic to your site typically should get you more people to call in than without it. So it can harm you at times. But the positive traffic flow based upon what does your website typically will overcompensate for if you have no availability, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I'm getting such an education here. Like, side note, are you worried about me starting my own marketing business and taking all of your clients?
The way you're going, like you're gonna have a little empire up there. So I'll come
Wait.
to work for you. It'll be a full circle.
Yeah, it's the last thing that you need to worry about. Just in closing, Ryan, any additional wisdom that we didn't unpack? Anything else that we should be making sure that the listeners are privy to?
Yeah, I would ask this question. I think, to me, this is always the most valuable thing that I get out of talking to you is, if I'm a young practice owner, or I'm, in my 40s and with two locations. What have, through your experience of owning, your practices, when you see times like this where there might be some adversity and some challenges, how do you go back to making decisions on what to do? So do you decide, should I grow? Should I add a doctor? Because this is a more challenging time to do that. And how do you make those critical decisions on the growth of your business or where you're going with your business?
Yeah, super good question. And kind of like we were talking about before we hit record, my personal philosophy is just double down on what you can control and not worry about anything else. So I know that we are going to grow a certain percentage year over year, independent of things that are happening outside of my walls. Now, sometimes it'll be easy if things are booming, and sometimes it'll be hard if families are feeling the pinch. So I get that, but I can't control that. But what I can control in situations where there's a looming recession or, families are or sharpening their pencil in terms of saving money is the patient experience is to the point that we started this call, making sure that my team is extremely well trained on handling opportunities and having the skill set to communicate with patients. Back in the day, and I don't feel this way anymore, but I do to a certain extent. Like I always wanted to figure out a way to say yes to the patient, right? Do you take my insurance? Yes. Can I get in today? Yes. Do you offer this procedure? Yeah. Like now, as we've grown and we've been a little bit more selective with things, we do say no sometimes. But if I was a young dentist growing, my mindset would be how do I stop saying no? Like I always want to say yes to the patient. Now, again, that comes with a caveat. I'm not going to say yes to a compromised treatment plan or say yes to a patient that's devalued my time or that was disrespectful to my team. But those are the outliers. But if you can continually say to patients, yes, we have time today. Yes, I don't have to refer you for that procedure. Um, yes, we're open early. Yes, we're open late. Yes, we take your insurance. Yes, we have payment plans. Like you're just kind of recession proofing yourself. And if you do those things, you do those things well, I think you can continue to grow and you can take some risks, whereas everyone else is contracting, everyone else is lowering their marketing budget, and they're gonna let a part-time associate go because of this scarcity mindset. But control what you can control and really double down on those things. And it's just treated me really, really well over the past 25 years.
Yeah, that's I'd say the biggest, and I'll close the mind with this is the biggest thing I see about your business is how and it starts. This is maybe a little philosophical to end here, but it starts with how you treat people is how your team treats the patients. And going back to do what you can control, you and your team treat the patients with such excellence of care and compassion. And I think that goes, you're going to do fine through times like this because you treat people well. And I know that's easy to say, and it's just like, oh, hey, make sure everyone's smiling and doing this. But I think it starts at the top. And so I think that's something that you have done that I think has helped grow your practice. And we can see it in the data. That's another podcast there. We can see how well people respect your brand and look at the data for that. So I think that's a very good answer. And I think it's something that if I could tell all practices, treat the patients with the highest amount of, care and compassion, and you'll get through times like this easier.
Amen, brother. Well said. Well said. Well, Ryan, again, thank you so much for the time and for the expertise and the wisdom. And one of the reasons I love having you on the podcast is I always learn so much. And then, you and I both know my director of operations, Amy. So I'll get off of this call and then I'll shoot her a text and I'll be like, Amy, I learned all this stuff. I just got done talking to Ryan. And then 5 minutes will go by and she's like, yeah, Jason, I know all that, right? So,
Yep.
I'm getting educated on stuff that she already knows, and you've taught her and stuff like that. So, hey, Ryan, if anyone is interested in setting up a call with CMO Share, or just maybe getting some insight as to what you guys offer, what's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, so if you go to mycmoshare.com, that's MYCMO, the word share.com, you can just put in your information there and you can set up a call with myself or one of my strategists and we'll give you some advice.
Awesome, Ryan. Thank you so much for the time and the wisdom. I hope you have an amazing day.
You too. Thanks, man.
Thank you. That wraps up another episode of the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. You have a choice today. Choose to be a lighthouse. Lighthouses are powerful and steadfast. They are beacons of light for others to reference when life gets turbulent. Go out into the world today and become a lighthouse for someone. Give more than you get. True joy comes from serving others. Start today. I'm Jason Tenori, your host. Thank you for listening to the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. For more information, podcast show notes, or links to anything that we have discussed today, please check out our website, thedentallighthouse.com. We would love to hear from you. If you would like to get on the show, please email us at podcast@thedentallighthouse.com.